Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. Election Day is less than a month away. The stakes are high in Seattle's mayoral race as the city grapples with affordability, policing, and homelessness. Seattle Times reporter David Kroman is here to talk about how the race between incumbent Mayor Bruce Harrell and challenger Katie Wilson is playing out. But first, let's get you caught up. A West Seattle author is a finalist for the prestigious National Book Awards. Claudia Rowe is one of 5 authors being considered for nonfiction. Her book, Wards of the State, The Long Shadow of American Foster Care, examines the foster care to prison pipeline. Rowe is a former Seattle Times reporter and current member of the paper's editorial board. The winners will be announced November 19th. The University of Washington today will hold its 20th annual reading of the U.S. Constitution. It's hosted by UW Libraries, and participants will read about a minute each of the full text. The event will begin with remarks from community members about their sworn oaths to uphold the Constitution, including a Navy officer and a judge. It all begins at 3 o'clock this afternoon at the Allen Library. You can also join by Zoom. And all Washington state parks are free tomorrow. That means you don't need a Discover Pass to park. You may want to pack your rain gear, though. After tomorrow, the next free admission day is Veterans Day, November 11th. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. It's general election season in Seattle. While ballots won't be mailed until late next week, candidate debates are well underway. Just last night, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell and challenger Katie Wilson debated once again. Seattle Times reporter David Kroman is here to break down what we've seen from each campaign and candidate so far and what we can anticipate going into the November election. Thanks for taking the time, David. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start by reintroducing Mayor Bruce Harrell and challenger Katie Wilson to listeners. We'll start with Katie Wilson. David, who is she?
Katie is somebody that if you have spent any time in City Hall over the last decade, you probably know or have run into. But if you have not spent time in City Hall, then you probably had never heard of her before. She's very politically involved in the sense that she founded a advocacy organization called the Transit Riders Union, which originally pushed for preserving Metro service in the early 2010s.
For, low-wage workers who work as security guards or, overnight shifts at hotels or food service or whatever, people need to be able to get to work. And also, Seattle's becoming a 24-hour city, and people who go out late at night to party need a way to get home.
But then kind of transitioned into this larger, more kind of organized lobbyist effort within City Hall to push the council people to pass kind of more populist economic policies.
Activist Katie Wilson says she feels the city hasn't done enough to help the homeless population.
That's wrong. So we're going to be holding that inside space in City Hall to basically send the message that everyone needs a warm, safe space inside. And so, we challenge the city to kick us out into the cold.
They really pushed for, the passage of an income tax in an effort to force a court case and try and overturn precedent in Washington state around income taxes. They were behind 2 major pushes for taxes on big businesses and rich people, frankly, in Seattle to fund housing and homelessness services, some landlord-tenant regulations. And so this is somebody who's been very involved in city politics for a long time, though never in any sort of formal elected capacity. Her transitioning into seeking a kind of more formal role in City Hall is noteworthy.
Interesting. Okay. Mayor Bruce Harrell, how did he get to the position of Seattle mayor? Just bullet point it for listeners, David.
Mayor Harrell was elected to the Seattle City Council in 2007. He is a lawyer. He'd worked for a telecommunications firm and had his own law firm for a while. He served 3 terms on the Seattle City Council.
I was elected to serve the constituents of District 2, and I will continue to do so. I have lived in that district most of my life, and it is truly one of the most diverse and colorful communities in this city.
Conveniently for him, the 2 years in the last 18 that he was not on the council was in 2020 and 2021, a time when the voting public generally turned against politicians. And, he used that kind of to his advantage, which is he ran for mayor in 2021 on the platform of, I'm both experienced, but also I don't have the baggage of 2020 and 2021 and promised a return to stability.
I will be the first to admit that, in my opinion, the city of Seattle has used unreasonable force in the protests, and we will have no tolerance for that here in the city of Seattle under my leadership.
Both in the city generally, but kind of more specifically to the Seattle Police Department and Public Safety. And at the time, that resonated really well, and he fairly easily won election to mayor in 2021.
All right, well, let's talk about how Harrell and Wilson's campaigns are positioning themselves before the primary.
Yeah, so, Katie Wilson got into the mayor's race in February after a fairly pivotal vote to tax high-paying companies to fund social housing in Seattle, because Mayor Harrell had supported an alternative that would not have seen any new taxes to fund this kind of housing. He then kind of became the face of that campaign against the tax. I think he was not particularly happy to have been made the face of that, but he was on a lot of the flyers and advertisements for that. And so Katie Wilson, looked at the results of that election, which were very heavily in favor of the tax, and said, you know what, I see an opportunity here. I think Mayor Harrell is out of step with what Seattle voters support, which is the kind of economic populism, specifically, taxes on big companies and rich people to fund social services. She looked at those results and said, I think Mayor Harrell's out of step with that. I think I've got a shot based on the results of that election. At the time, I'm guilty of this. I think the general public saw her as a long shot candidate because Harrell had come into this with a lot of experience. He had locked up support from kind of more centrist, moderate, by Seattle standards, Democratic base, but also had locked up endorsements from Pramila Jayapal and people in the labor and union world. And so it really, on its surface, looked like he had not left a lot of space for challengers to either side of him. And so Katie, being the person that she is, which is kind of from a more advocacy background without a lot of institutional support, it was easy to think that Harrell had this thing locked up.
The primary election is also a major signal of how voters received each of the candidates' pitches, David. So let's talk about, that surprising win from Katie Wilson. What happened?
There was two pretty different reads on who the electorate would be from Harrell and Wilson. Harrell was running a campaign that was very similar to his campaign in 2021, which was quite successful, which is one of stability, one of public safety, one of kind of restoring trust in the police department. Particularly after Donald Trump's election, he's saying, I know how to run the city. I know how to respond to this. Whereas Wilson was running a campaign that was really, I think, trying to tap into the fact that people in Seattle, even people who have good, decently paying jobs, are struggling to get ahead. It's hard to have childcare, hard to pay rent. And I think was capitalizing on the fact that that is happening in a city with so much wealth and so much tech. I think it certainly helped that a lot of those tech figures that loom so large in Seattle started kind of cozying up to President Trump. I think she took advantage of that. And so there was these two messages. One of kind of is one that we had heard before from Harrell, and then one that was sort of trying to get at the economic anxiety of a lot of people in Seattle. And as it turned out, and I think some polling has backed this up even since, people were really thinking about their position in Seattle and how they were doing, and sided with Wilson by a quite meaningful 10 points. And not only is it 10 points over Harrell, but she exceeded 50%. And if you're in the primary, that means you won a majority of the votes.
Yeah, really interesting, David. And of course, the primary tells a story, but time is short now until the general election. What is most important for each candidate to get across?
Well, what we're seeing from the Harrell campaign is two things. A recalibration, and he was fairly frank about this on the election night in the primary, which is that voters weren't buying what he was selling. They wanted somebody who was more of a disruptor. He's used the term change agent. So on the one hand, he's trying to convince voters that he can be that person, that he can be the spark that moves Seattle in the direction that people want to see. I also think there's an acknowledgement in the campaign that that's a really hard thing for him to do in 3 months, because he has been in City Hall for 16 of the last 18 years. So I think acknowledging that, the Harrell campaign has also tried really, really hard to redefine or define at all Katie Wilson. Paint her as somebody who does not have a lot of experience, who during 2020 spoke supportively of budgets that would have cut the police department. One of the quotes he had is, "Now is not the time for hope," which, of course, the Wilson campaign seized on. I think he intended to mean now is not the time for basically a gamble on somebody who has not held this office before. So that's what his goals are. Try and convince people that he can be the kind of spark plug they want him to be, while also painting Katie Wilson as unfit for office. Wilson, meanwhile, what she needs to do is, she kind of just needs to run the campaign she ran in the primary, which was clearly quite successful. But she's also, trying to show that Harrell has been in office for as long as he has, and still the city has all the problems that people are feeling right now, with homelessness and affordability and to an extent public safety. She is trying to show that Harrell is not the kind of visionary leader that the city needs right now, and that she is more in tune with people's kind of daily concerns. For each of them, it's sort of different priorities, and you can see it that they're hammering on them pretty hard.
I've watched a couple of debates between Mayor Harrell and Katie Wilson. He talks a lot, you're right, about Katie Wilson's lack of experience. How has she responded during the debates, David? Let's talk about that a little bit.
She has responded in a few ways, which is that last week, she started talking about Charlie Royer, a fairly moderate mayoral candidate, but the last mayor to serve 3 terms in Seattle. Her argument was he was a TV news reporter before being elected. So on the one hand saying, I do know how to manage people. On the other hand saying, if you have the right vision, that is not necessarily a prerequisite. Being an executive or manager is not necessarily a prerequisite for holding this office.
So I am very proud of the role that I played in 2020 in designing and passing the Jumpstart Payroll Expense Tax, which is our city's landmark tax on wealthy corporations, raising almost $400 million a year for affordable housing, many other things. It's allowed our current mayor to balance the budget for the last 4 years.
Incumbent Bruce Harrell has a history here, like you mentioned. Katie Wilson has an opportunity to look at it and talk about it. What is she saying about Harrell's time in office that might make a difference for voters?
Her argument is a bit of the outsider argument, which is think of all of the things that you struggle with daily and the things that have frustrated you about Seattle over the last 2 decades. And Harrell has been in office for almost all of those. So if you are frustrated with your place in life right now or the state of the city, you have no one to blame but Mayor Harrell. He is as establishment as they come in Seattle. He's been in City Hall since the iPhone debuted, with the exception of a 2-year break in there. And he has, backing from a lot of the institutional support in the Democratic Party, in business, to an extent labor as well. So, if you are feeling anti-establishment at all, which I think, we're seeing a lot of that both in Seattle and elsewhere, then she is trying to kind of direct that ire at Harrell and painting him as that establishment that you should be frustrated with.
Voters are going to get 20 opportunities to watch Mayor Harrell and Katie Wilson debate before the November election. That is a lot of dialogue, David. I've seen just a couple right now. The first one, Bruce Harrell, I got to admit, he came out aggressive and swinging. Really, his tone on the Seattle Channel debate was pretty strong against Katie Wilson. The second debate I saw on Fox, which was the League of Women Voters, I believe, a 180 on tone, I have to admit.
I'm not desperate to run against a defund. I just don't know how any executive could change their tune so quickly because it's politically expedient. That's what I don't like.
I can see some midstream adjustments from the mayor's performance here. What are you noticing?
Harrell clearly sees these debates as an opportunity. And anyone who thinks that they are losing or behind in a race generally wants to do as many debates as possible to try and change the narrative. Frankly, I'm a little surprised that Katie Wilson has agreed to as many as she has. That's kind of a dynamic we see a lot in these races, where the person who is perceived to be ahead just tries to not do any debates, and the person who's trailing tries to do as many as possible. So it's interesting that they got this many booked in the first place. Harrell's a lawyer. He has been in City Hall for a long time, an experienced politician. So he clearly sees this as a strength. Whereas Wilson has not done a lot of these debates, although I think that she is getting stronger as they go along. But you're right that Harrell clearly sees his mission as to cast Wilson in a negative light, and he's trying to use these debates to do that. The question, I think, for some folks is he coming on too strong, as you mentioned? I do think he's trying to calibrate a little bit on that. But again, I think he sees these debates as an opportunity to cast himself in a stronger and more stable light and, show Katie Wilson as somebody who is not prepared for the moment.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. All right. Well, we have several more weeks until the general election. What are you watching for? What can Seattle voters expect during this time, besides tons of political advertisements?
Yeah, I was going to say, that'll be the big thing, is your doorstep will be covered in pamphlets, surely. It's going to be a race to who gets the last word on this. Can Bruce Harrell paint Katie Wilson not only as inexperienced, but he's trying to show that her idealism, her kind of ideological bent is frankly unrealistic. And then whereas Wilson is trying to paint Harrell as too narrow-minded about what the city actually needs. And so I think that is going to be kind of the essential debate, is do you go with the person who is saying, I'm going to give you realistic goals and I'm going to do everything I can to achieve them, and that is the Bruce Harrell message, versus the Katie Wilson message is, I think the city should be aspiring to more than it is right now. And as mayor, I'm going to set very ambitious goals that may on paper sound sort of difficult to reach, but that is where we need to go. And I think those two messages are really what we're going to hear a lot of in the next month.
Thank you. David Kroman covers politics at the Seattle Times. Really appreciate the insight.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you listening to Seattle Now. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Andy Hurst, Vaughn Jones, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.